It's great to be back in Soho, picking up the traces of my walk that I filmed, I think it was in August. So we're going to walk around the other half of one of London's most famous, most storied and most attractive districts. I mean, I'm in Rupert Court right now, which is all right during the daytime. In the morning, there is a slight odour down here, I won't lie. So we're crossing over the traces of the previous walk, which I will link to below. And what we'll do is we'll pass up here and I want to pick up the trail at Broadwick Street with its fantastic stories. We will come back along Brewer Street, but there, the adult store, there, the adult bookstore, that used to have really good books at the back of the shop and in the basement. It's sort of like the reverse of what you would normally expect. You have to go into the basement for the actual literature. But they used to have stuff that publishers must have remainded and stuff. You could get some amazing books in there. I don't think you can anymore. Berwick Street Market. Food stalls just packing up for the day. So we're going to turn into Broadwick Street. This is really where our walking tour begins. This is, contains, I would say, one of the most important locations in London. You might say two of the most important locations in London, just up ahead. The first streets in Soho were really laid out on the fields in the 17th century. And people will ask about the name. I did cover this in the first video when I was in Soho Square, but it relates to, apparently, the most plausible explanation. It was a battle cry of the Duke of Monmouth, who was given land here and built a big house in Soho, around Soho Square. He was given the land by his dad, Charles II. He was an illegitimate son. It was apparently his battle cry, Soho, one particular battle, which I think he lost. The John Snow pub over there. It was built in the late 19th century on the home of the Dr. John Snow, who made one of the most startling discoveries that led to really created the groundwork for the expansion of the city that we know today. There is like a ornamental water pump up here, hand pump, that marks the discovery made by John Snow that linked infected water to cholera. At that point, they thought diseases were mostly airborne, miasma. They thought it travelled through the air, and he connected an outbreak of cholera around Soho, which was on his patch, to the cholera outbreaks that were sweeping through London at that time. Tens of thousands, well, not tens of thousands, I think around 10,000 people died. I think it was 1858 was the year. And at first, people didn't believe him. It went against conventional thinking, and I think the breakthrough was when there was a particular lady who lived in Hampstead who was from Soho, and she used to send her maid to collect water from a pump here in Broadwick Street, and she had cholera. She developed cholera in an area where there hadn't been an outbreak, and where the water actually, funnily enough, was considered pretty good. So he had analysed the water and proven that it was infected water that caused cholera, and that led pretty quickly to the building of the modern sewer network in London, which in a way laid the groundwork for the expansion of London, because the infected water would have kept the numbers down. Question is, where's the actual water pump? There was a water pump here. It was down there near the pub. They must have removed it when they were doing that building work. But funnily enough, a lovely fellow called Will contacted me recently, and he's an epidemiologist, is that right? Someone who studies infectious diseases. And he said where he works up here, I think he must work at the School of Tropical Medicines, they have the handle of the original pump, because the pump that was here was just like a replica one. And here's the water pump. I must have walked straight past it. Like I say, it's not the original, it's just a replica, and it doesn't have a handle. But we know where the original handle is. And this block of flats here, William Blake House, marks the place where the great poet and painter and visionary of London, William Blake, was born. in 1758.
We love it.
Yeah, everyone loves a bit of Blake, don't they? And inevitably, he had a vision down here. His parents had a hosiery shop, apparently, according to Ed Glynott. And he saw the face of God pressed into the window. He saw things everywhere, didn't he? He saw angels on Peckham Common, on Peckham Rye, I should say. Oh, that's interesting. The plaque here says 1757, not 1758 in the London Compendium. There you go. You see, the word is on the street. And this links nicely to the Swedenborg walk that I did a couple of months ago, that just recently went on my YouTube channel with Ian Sinclair and Stephen McNeely of the Swedenborg Society. And there's an overlap between Swedenborg and Blake. I can't remember quite whether they met, but Swedenborg certainly knew Blake's mother. And Blake became a kind of follower of Swedenborg after Swedenborg's death. So he was a very important character, Swedenborg, in the kind of visionary London that Blake has become certainly more associated with and more famous for. And there's a Blake Society, and they come and do events here on Blake's birthday. And there's a group called the Blake Block, like mimicking the anarchist Black Bloc, and they do little Blake-style interventions in places. Yeah, look out for the Blake Society. I'm not sure when his birthday was. When was his birthday? It says, no, it's 28th of November. So if you come here on the 28th of November, there'll be something going on. There'll be some people reading poetry and stuff.
Love your videos.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you. Filming one at the moment. Lovely to meet Dan there, who watches the videos and enjoys them. Lovely to meet you, Dan. Hope you enjoy this one. You might even be in it. I don't know this street here. Is it? I'm short-sighted. It's either Canton Street or Ganton Street. Actually, I do know this street. As soon as I saw the pub there, I have a memory of going in that pub. Actually, I think it was on a Blake walk, which turned into a bit of a pub crawl, as I'm sure you can imagine. Newburgh Street, the White Horse on the left. Another decent pub. If they took the pubs out of London, I think I'd be lost, because that's how I navigate my way around. So I guess we should deal with the whole Carnaby Street thing, right? Carnaby Street is the kind of very typical tourist destination I've tended to avoid in my videos. Because who needs to tell you about Carnaby Street? But it's a mistake to miss it out, particularly where it relates to the development of Soho. When this was Carnaby, there was a house here, Carnaby House, and there was a market. When there would have still been fields around the area, certainly to the west of here there would have still been fields, and certainly to the north on the other side of Oxford Street. So at that point, that's when some of the early 17th, 18th century development would have taken place around here. I think this is more 18th century, to be honest with you. 1680s, I think, it starts to get laid out, and the name Carnaby is associated with it. But then, of course, what it's famous for is being the centre of kind of counterculture in the 60s, of fashion. That had already started in the 50s. I think it was a tailor down here who made quite flamboyant suits for the characters that were hanging around Soho. And I think in a way, actually, that association with swinging London, I think it was a magazine article in Time, wasn't it? That actually, in a way, has kind of killed Carnaby Street, because for Londoners, Carnaby Street is a byword for kind of tourist tack, cashing in on this kind of Austin Powers-like idea of London. Although they do have a really good Adidas store down here I can recommend. Staff are really nice in there. Otherwise, but the pubs are great around here, really good. Shakespeare's Head's a decent pub. To tell you a little pro tip when you're in Soho, most of these pubs have rooms upstairs and people don't know they're there. So if it's really rammed downstairs, everyone's drinking outside, sometimes you can just slip in, go upstairs and get a seat. I guess I was a little bit sniffy about Carnaby Street, and then I just nearly bought another pair of trainers in size back there. You see, so that's a reason not to come down here, because you'll end up spending money that you didn't want to spend. I didn't buy them, but I am going to go in Muji, so I'll probably buy some nice candles or something. This is Kingley Street, just behind the famous department store, the Liberty's department store there. And there are so many great pubs down here. It's just full of great pubs. The Clacker, I went in there once, I think it was Christmas Eve. Really good. This is an interesting themed little bar here. It's Kingley Court station for high spirits, scoundrels and swing. Looks really interesting. Bootlegger breakout, it says. And now we turn into Beak Street, which is where Canaletto had a studio here in the 1740s. It's got to be marked with a plaque, surely. Kingley Court there looks like an interesting little nugget. I kind of feel like I should go in there now I've said that. It's mostly a building site. I think it's going to become like a big like food court type place, I think. Silver House over there, I think a reference to the original name, which was Silver Street. Or was it that there were silversmiths here? One or the other. I think in the two Soho videos I've done, you see, I think actually in a way Soho seems to have two halves. I think the first one is the classic lively, seedier Soho, gay Soho as well. More like, well, I'd say not more nightlife, but different kind of vibe. It was the sleazier side once upon a time. And this side, sort of from Broadwick Street to Carnaby Street down Kingley Street, is a little bit more upmarket, This is not the kind of more exciting Soho, but it's a good place for a night out. And I think we found Canaletto's house, there you go. And now a restaurant called Polpo. So this is where the famous Italian painter Canaletto lived and worked for a period of time. And the old coffee house over there is another really, really good pub. It's shut. I hope it's just shut because it's a Monday afternoon. And that was one of the best places to get Brodie's beer, Brodie's of Leighton. And now that they don't have the William IV, it might be the only place to get Brodie's beer, the full selection of Brodie's beer anyway. I can see the staff in there setting up for the night, so all is well at the old coffee house. So I feel like we have to turn into Upper James Street to take us into Golden Square, one of the key locations on this Soho walking tour. Golden Square is a curious place in a lot of ways. It dates from the late 17th century, so it's part of the original development of Soho. And it was named after goldsmiths that were in the area, which is interesting. There were goldsmiths here around that time. It was originally Golden and St James's Square. So I'm not entirely sure where the goldsmiths would have been. I guess, because it was fields around here. But it's interesting there were goldsmiths here that far back. There's a statue of William III in the middle of the square there somewhere, which I'm going to go and look for. And of course, you can sort of see this would have been a really sort of affluent area, quite distinct from the more kind of immigrant area around that we saw around kind of, Berwick Street, Wardour Street, Greek Street, Frith Street, Greek and Italian immigrants. This would have been the more well-to-do people. And Golden Square still is a kind of bit more well-to-do, isn't it? I think today you've got some really nice restaurants around it, some sort of posh restaurants. And you've also got like HQs of some big companies have their central London office in Golden Square. There's a bit of advertising around here. So just various big companies that want to have a place in the centre of town, but maybe need a factory or an industrial place further out, or perhaps not even in London. But I rarely come into Golden Square. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm not, a man who gravitates to the shishi parts of town. I don't think that is William III. I might be wrong. But looks like George has got under there. The plaque there tells us that these houses here, these little row houses, were the Portuguese embassy in London from 1724 to 1747. What's this rather grand building here? I'm hoping that there is a plaque. It's not in my notes. Turning now into Brewer Street. This is one of the great streets of Soho. Brewer Street appears on a map from 1664, so it was laid out in that time, in the 17th century, around the time of Golden Square. And it was on land, developed on land owned by a fellow called Sir William Pulteney, and there's Pulteney Street around here somewhere. And what's interesting is the parcel of land on the map that Pulteney owned shows a couple of little bits of land within it, and one was called Knave's Acre. Amazing. And also, I think the alternative name for it was Laystall Peace, and a laystall was, I think a laystall was a public, was a place, laystall was a dump, I think. I'll look that up. I think it was like a dumping ground. Interestingly, we're going to go towards Great Windmill Street, which is obviously where there was a windmill around that time. And there's somewhere else I've read where a windmill was placed upon a laystall. I guess because there wasn't any other use for it, because it was a dump. But yeah, that's Brewer Street for you. And just off Brewer Street, you have the Piccadilly Theatre, which is kind of in a back street off of Piccadilly Circus. And back in the day, when I worked in the West End, it was always said that nothing actually ever succeeded at the Piccadilly. Shows came here and died here, even if they were really good. Like, no one seemed to want to come to the Piccadilly Theatre. I don't know if Moulin Rouge has bucked that trend. And that's Brasserie Zedel, which is actually a really quite nice French brasserie to go to. A little bit, sort of not massively swanky, a little bit swanky. Had a really fantastic family meal there once. Lovely to meet Mickey back there, a viewer who was out there doing a bit of photography, street photography. I imagine he was getting some decent shots by the looks of it. I love little streets like this. Is Bridle Lane, and I think this is on the original 17th century street plan as well. It's certainly got that feel to it, hasn't it? And another of the great Soho streets here, Lexington Street. I think it's next to the street where Mildred's is, which is one of the old, sort of very well established vegetarian restaurants. The Duke of Argyll here on the corner of Beak Street and Great Windmill Street. That was a fine pub. And next on our walking tour of Soho is Great Windmill Street. And Great Windmill Street is another street which dates from that 17th century development of Soho. But unlike the rest of it, this was a bit more speculative and not so well done. That place over there is called the Thin White Duke. Clearly a reference to David Bowie, but he's more associated with the other side of Regent Street, where one of the photographs for Ziggy Stardust was taken, as I found out when I did my Mayfair walk, and people told me in the comments. And this Be at One place, what is Be at One? It's like a cocktail bar type place. That was once the Red Lion pub where one of the early meetings of the Communist League took place, and Marx and Engels put forward some of the original proposals for the Communist Manifesto in the room above that pub. Do you think radicalism is taking the route at Be at One as I stand outside here? You never know. And Ham Yard here is where the windmill was located. It gives Great Windmill Street its name. It was built here, I think, in the 1560s. I think it had been demolished by the end of the 1600s, but the name lives on. I think that tree marks the spot where the windmill was. It is visible on the old map. And here is the Lyric pub. I can't remember much about the Lyric pub, I'll be honest with you. I've definitely been in there in my Soho years. But yeah, it's just one of many. And here we have the famous Windmill Theatre. I think its fame originates really from, it was a place, I think in the 30s and 40s they had what they called nude tableaus. And so you couldn't have erotic dancers or nudity in London at that point due to censorship laws, but you could if the models didn't move. So the ladies would be there in their state of undress, frozen still. And now I'm going to do one of my possible misrememberings that I know annoys some people, but I can't see it in the notes, and I'm pretty sure I remember hearing that the Windmill Theatre, that's what it's known for, right, for these nude tableaus, but they also had to have other entertainment. because no one's going to come and just look at some kind of naked statues. So this is where a lot of the great comedians of the 50s and 60s started out here. I think it's where people like Michael Benteen, I've got Spike Milligan's name in my head, I've also got Hancock in my head as well. A lot of those kind of comedians, maybe Sid James, that kind of generation of comedians, they used to have gigs here. I'm pretty sure, the names might be wrong, but it is associated with that great wave of comedy that came in sort of like the late 50s and the 60s, you know, around the Goon Show and Hancock's Half Hour, kind of culture-defining moments. I think some of the writers and performers associated with that period also started out at the Windmill Theatre. I'm going to leave that there and wait for someone to correct me in the comments if that is incorrect, and they can show that it's incorrect, but I'm pretty sure that's it. Now it's table dancing club. I think they sometimes somehow call it a gentleman's club. Quite how they get table dancing and gentlemen in the same phrase, I don't know. I'm going to come and stand here by the lyric stage door because I just realised that might be the other David Bowie reference, mightn't it? Is that one of the other photographs on the back of Ziggy Stardust? Is it the lyric and it's the phone box? Or is it the phone box is here? David Bowie fans down in the comments smashing the keyboard apart if they haven't already done so. And the other Great Windmill Street reference, well, I'm not entirely sure where, is the Scene nightclub, which is where kind of mod culture is said to have really been born or originated in the 60s, a real hub of mod culture there. If I'd left that one out, that would have been 50% of the comments would have been, you didn't mention the Scene. I've mentioned it, but I'm afraid I haven't located it. This is Archer Street. Well, I think for me that concludes this. I'm going to cross the street actually, get a bit more light. So I think for me that concludes this this walk around Soho part 2, and I think it's going to conclude the Soho series for me. Lady just smiled at me in the restaurant there. Do you think she watches the videos, or do you think she's just being kind? Because you think people might see a man walking down the street talking to himself in the camera. They might be forgiven for having a little sneer, but she had a nice little smile on her face, which was really lovely. Anyway, so that's the end of this video, this lovely walk around Soho. Where have I missed? I mean, not just stories, there'll be some great stories and facts that I've missed, definitely loads, but also places. I didn't go down Poland Street, and there's a couple obviously interconnected streets I didn't go down, but I didn't feel like that was an enormous omission. I didn't have anything particular that I wanted to go to there. And obviously before you say, well, you missed Wardour Street and Frith Street and the French House, that's in the other Soho video if you haven't already watched it. So watch both of them. But there will be places, I'm not sure there is a third video though, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll go in the comments and say, oh my God, all these places I've got to go to. So once again, thank you for joining me on that fantastic walk around Soho. I really appreciate all your support. Thanks to my wonderful supporters on Patreon, the channel members here on YouTube. And as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. And as I always know when I start off, I don't know where it's going to be. I've got a list of about 80 walks. Could be any one of them, or something that's not on that list.